Hey guys, my name is JT Valiente and welcome back to my channel. You're about to watch an episode of a series entitled 10 Questions. And in this series, we consult different youth leaders who are championing different movements targeted to solve social issues that we face right here in the Philippines. I hope that you can join me throughout the rest of the series and learn with me as I go along. So before I begin, I'm going to be detailing a timestamp of each question that I'm going to be asking in the video so that you can skip around without having to waste any of your time and find out exactly what you might not know already. So here it is. Have a good look. Take some notes if you want. And enjoy the video, guys.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to be discussing a very pertinent issue that's sort of railroaded by all the other issues because it doesn't seem as apparent as a lot of what comes out on Twitter. But it's still a very much so real issue that we all face collectively as a human race. And so I wanted this to be the first episode, the first discussion that we actually have, because I personally feel like this is the single biggest issue that we face as like for our entire generation, Gen Z kids. This is our fight. And so I really wanted to highlight this by talking about it in our first episode. And I have with me two of my good friends from the Ateneo, twins, Kirsten and Chelsea Angeles, and they're both advocates for climate action. So I'll just give you a quick introduction of them both. So Kristen is a third-year university student studying BS Health Sciences in the Ateneo. She currently works as an associate vice president for the health promotions for Project Laan, which is a student-run public health organization where she develops health modules for partner communities. She's also now the president of Effective Altruism Blue, a university chapter of Effective Altruism in the Philippines, which aims to use reason and evidence in figuring out how to help others as much as possible and taking action on that basis. Kristen has several advocacies, including global health and poverty, animal welfare, women's rights, and climate change action. And she aims to be more active in spreading and taking more impactful action on these advocacies in her life and future career. And then we also have Chelsea Angeles, who is a junior as well from the Ateneo, where she is majoring in AB philosophy and minoring in Spanish and literature. She is a member of the Ateneo Lex and ISAC and ADMU, and recently joined Greenpeace Philippines as an ambassador for the Better Normal campaign and a volunteer training to become a Greenpeace campaigner. She also recently joined YAKAP, or Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, the counterpart for Greta Thunberg's founded Fridays for Future movement in the Philippines. She's also a strong advocate for planetary health, human and animal rights, and is an aspiring environmental and human rights lawyer who aims to help lead the fight for climate justice through impactful policy change. I super salute you both in all of your endeavors because I'm one and the same with your advocacies. I really support climate change, human rights, global health and poverty. I feel like these are all highlighted, especially in this time under living through a pandemic. So let's begin the conversation. So just so you guys know, we're gonna run down just 10 questions that I felt would really highlight this issue, and we'll just have an exchange, like a very casual conversation. And then at the end of it, we hope to have sort of educated you guys, the audience, to sort of take up a stance of your own and hopefully participate in pushing forward these advocacies. So I'll begin with the first question. Maybe we can start with Chelsea. So Chelsea, what is the climate crisis? Could you tell us what that is?
I think that the term climate crisis is a relatively newly used term. I think throughout most of our lives growing up, we've heard climate change, and it's kind of become a buzzword. Like its meaning's kind of been stripped away. Like if we think about it like a high school lesson, we tend to forget about, like, oh yeah, I think greenhouse gases, trap heat, temperatures rise and everything like that. But I think that framing it as a climate crisis is acknowledging that there's an emergency, that scientists are sounding alarm bells on the impending. It's like a climate catastrophe, essentially. And I think that it's really important to call it a crisis, because when we think about it, we have to really acknowledge how it's going to affect our future and create a planet that won't be habitable for us. And as members of the youth, we should really fear for that. So yeah, I think that that's what it really is.
Right, and we can sort of connect that to the whole Fridays for Future movement, right? Like, we're talking about the effects of climate change, but they aren't instant. We're seeing remnants of them today, but then we'll really feel the detriments of this 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line. And so this crisis is sort of, it's like we're in a microwave, we're slowly heating up, ready to be cooked or whatever.
Ready to be cooked.
Yeah, exactly. So Kirsten, what are your thoughts on the climate crisis, the terminology of it?
Yeah, I super agree with Chelsea in the sense that it's relatively new, in the sense that we are getting the realization that it's becoming more of an emergency. And I feel that it also adds to the sentiment that it's starting to become kind of an existential crisis already for humans, that in the most extreme scenarios, it might even collapse our civilizations or heavily affect us in a way that we can't turn back. So I guess when we say it's a crisis, it's something that all fields should be taking action on already, and that it start seeing the urgency a bit more rather than just understanding it completely. There should be more action on it already.
Right. Yeah.
True, yeah. Like,
Awesome.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, continue.
I think that calling it a crisis no longer allows us to kind of see climate change or the effects of climate change as an abstract threat kind of lurking in the future. It's really a reality that we face. And like, even though we come from backgrounds where we don't directly feel the impacts of climate change, we know, like, upon learning more about it and really researching into it, we see how it affects more people, especially members of the youth, who have to deal with the effects of climate change more, and the more vulnerable communities who also have to deal with that more.
Right. So on the topic of effects of climate change, how do you guys think this can affect the Philippines directly? Like, what are some examples or projections that people are saying, like, might actually happen to the Philippines down the line?
like we mentioned, we talked about earlier, in the first question. Important thing to remember is that the consequences of climate change won't equally be borne among the people or among the different communities in the Philippines. The Philippines is actually listed as one of the top countries affected by climate change, because we live in a country where we're really prone to natural disasters, and generally we're affected by rise in sea temperatures and sea levels and droughts and floods, storm surges. So that's really going to take a toll on the society, of like Philippine society.
Yeah, and adding to that, I also think that in the Philippines, what's most pressing is that the people who are less resilient to climate change or natural disaster shocks, like those living in poverty, those will be the most affected, such as those who work in agriculture, those who will be displaced. Also, the biodiversity of the Philippines, the development sector, I think those are all very, very prone to being damaged or hurt by climate change in the Philippines.
Right. So I personally am in the field of the development sector, and what we're seeing now is sort of a global shift in poverty rates. So, like, with every natural disaster, as each year comes, it seems to be getting worse and worse. Like, for example, our super typhoons that are supposed to be coming every 100 years are now here every 3 years. And that amount of time will shorten to every year. And then that amount of time will shorten into every 6 months. And then the frequency of these catastrophic events are just slowly rising in ratio and rate. And so that's where the fear really comes from, because we already see these huge events that are happening and affecting the lives of so many people. In 2013, when Typhoon Yolanda came, we got bored with so much international aid. But if this is happening to everyone all around the world, we're not going to be able to sustain ourselves. And that's why people, I think, in power should really care about this now. more
Yeah.
than it being, it's not safe for us. It's also like a huge economic downturn waiting to happen. Yeah.
Like the natural disasters really, like they really do take a toll on the economy, which should honestly get people in power or people with positions of influence to really listen, because that's what they care about, so it's really a crisis. We're really on the
Yes.
brink of a crisis.
Right. Okay. So, what do you think that people can make small changes in their lives, and if they can, what are these personal changes they can make?
Okay, so I'll go first.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, first, I believe like lifestyle changes are important. These can just be through how you vote with your consumption, like what you buy, what businesses you support, or what politicians you support. But apart from just lifestyle changes, I think that there's an importance of also donating to affected charities that provide a good complement. Like donations can be a complement to lifestyle change. Also, I believe urging policy, especially if you're not in policy or you don't have as much effect in policy, being a consumer can kind of take that power to help policy reform. Lastly, I think adapting careers or your future careers to somehow have an impact on climate change or the environment would be very impactful for someone to take on.
I agree with you, Kirsten. And also, to add to that, I think one small first step is really educating yourself, and that sounds so cliche and that sounds so abstract, because you hear it all the time, you see it, people are like, educate yourself, but it's really important to do so, because I firmly believe that this is how you establish a strong why and how you become a more informed and responsible consumer, and it will also help you adapt your career. It will also help you decide, and it will inform small decisions that build up, like those lifestyle decisions you mentioned, Kirsten, that build up. So that, and educating yourself is super important. And I think a lot of people actually neglect that, and it never stops. It's a never-ending process. New information pops up, and the more you know, you realize you don't know anything, and you feel unqualified to help. But that really shouldn't stop, right?
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
Stop you.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of your points. Like, educating yourself is really the first step to really finding out more about how you can also participate. I feel like that's what people don't necessarily see. Like, a lot of people get overwhelmed by everything that's happening, and that's extremely valid and fair. But like all of the news shouldn't make you feel comfortable. Like, it's meant to sort of put you on edge, because this really is, as we've been saying, a crisis, and a crisis necessitates a call to action. And so without first knowing what the crisis is about and how we can help, then we can't move forward from this. So a lot of people are speaking out now on social media. You have people like Greta Thunberg and all of these climate activists who are demanding climate justice all around the world. In the Philippines, we have a lot of climate advocates, but then a lot of them are also assassinated along the way. Like we see a lot of news about people who are like environmental lawyers, people who are environmental defenders, and they come into contact with all of these big business groups or politicians, and they get executed for their advocacies, and that's extremely scary. So how do you guys think the controversial anti-terror law poses a threat to advocates for climate change prevention? So how do you guys think that it'll sort of connect down the line?
I think it makes it more difficult, since we've been talking about how we want systemic change and policy reform. Having activism, or at least people to be a bit more critical of policies that have effect on the climate, I think that it'll be difficult to have that fine line be drawn between someone who's trying to fight for the environment, between what the law is trying to tag down. And I think that's one thing that's really unfortunate and sad about this, because people who are just fighting to uphold systemic change and climate change policy reform might be tagged as people who are going against the agenda of the Philippines, which I think is completely not the case.
Yeah.
What I find interesting about it is how a lot of people actually separate the environment with the political environment. Like when climate activists or organizations spoke out against the controversial anti-terror law, they were told to stay in their lane, or they were challenged on trying to relate the environment to the anti-terror law and like how it would affect it. They're like, stay in your lane, you know, this like you're supposed to be activists, not terrorists. And I'm just thinking, like, the anti-terror law, I think, will really pose a threat to activism, like Kirsten said, and activism is integral to environmental protection. Even before the anti-terror law, like back in 2018, 2019, like you said, JT, there are killings of environmental defenders. So, and this is before they decided to have a law, like you said, that might justify and legitimize, you know, the vilification, harassment, and neutralization of these people who speak out against policies and practices that big people in powerful positions support, or you know, those environmentally harmful policies, like they go against the general interests of people in power. So the definition given by the anti-terror law, I think, is overbroad and too vague. So
Agreed.
It's really scary. Like, if to think that the killings were happening before the anti-terror law, to justify this by like saying that they're enemies of the state, or they're going against the government, or you know, they're like just general dissent is considered terrorism, then that really poses a threat to environmental defenders. And also, I think that it weakens the support for the climate, the movement against climate action, because more people who do resonate or who do advocate for climate justice will be more afraid to speak out. Like, even now I see it, and I understand that even families are afraid for the children to speak out because they fear for their safety. So it will weaken the support for the movement.
That's really the scary part here. It's like we're already having these conversations where, you know, we are in a climate crisis, and yet there are no alarm bells ringing, except for the people who are choosing to speak out despite the violence that is being thrown against them. Now that we have state power, you know, institutionalized to forward that kind of violence, you're right, it does scare a lot of people, including myself, and I'm sure you guys as well, and your own families, and rightly so. So now, like, there's this bigger call for courage to really fight for, you know, like the future, because like, even though we can't see it, like, or we can't physically see it face value wise, our future, all of the science, all of the math, all of the predictions are pointing to crisis. And so I just hope that, you know, the Philippine government can rethink their decision to institutionalize the terror law. There are a bunch of petitions now that are being filed in the Supreme Court to repeal the law. So let's see how that goes. But on the topic of, you know, the Philippine government, what suggestions do you guys think we can make to have them sort of prevent or slow climate change?
Yeah, for me, I think that there has to be an increase in research, because there might be areas, or there are areas, that would lack data to get a comprehensive view of the status of climate change in the Philippines and what can be done, so that it's a bit more data-driven and science, backed up by science, so that there could be more strategies to not really just deal with the effects of climate change, but to mitigate the effects that we experience. I think what's super important also is to reduce the carbon emission, and this can be kind of implemented in businesses or in tax reform to encourage low emission technology. So I think sustainable energy is something that the government should be investing on right now. Yeah.
And I also think that the government should declare the climate crisis as a national emergency and priority, so that they can really and then act on it. Like Kirsten said, I learned a lot actually from the Classrooms for Future training. I'm still in the process, but then they talked a lot about policy proposals like shifting to renewable energy. So like having community managed microgrids, solar, hydropower, geothermal, just renewable energy to cut down carbon emissions, because that's really going to cause the temperature increase, which is honestly costing so much. We're not on track to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Like, it's honestly crazy to think that now, even with the coronavirus lockdown, carbon dioxide levels are still increasing in the atmosphere. Another suggestion, actually I have a bunch because I learned.
Go for it. Let it all out. Let's hear it. We're here for this.
So shifting to renewable energy, and then to also promote zero waste and zero waste and then 0 kilometer food, not zero waste. But actually, I guess it's kind of similar, like kind of
Yeah.
overlap. And the establishment of policies that will really make them more affordable and accessible to the Filipinos, because people think that it's really pricey. So I think that they should really institute policies that make large corporations also support zero waste practices and 0 kilometer food, because these multinational corporations really should take accountability. They cause the most waste, you know, in ocean cleanups. Like most of the waste there came from just like 10 companies. It's crazy, and they're not doing enough to fix it.
Right.
So yeah, I think we should. It's really about policies and integrating zero waste into the Zero Waste Management Act. You know, making it something, normalizing it, innovating alternative delivery systems like reuse and refill systems, and also establishing farm schools that like.
Yeah.
I really hope that we can
Change the
and
whole
all.
thing.
Yeah, it's a complete overhaul of the system.
Yeah, you know,
Like it's like shifting everything.
right?
That's the call, really.
Right? Yeah, to fund, like Kirsten said, to fund research, like especially right, agri research to support indigenous practices and to develop better methods for farming, to support indigenous knowledge systems, and you know, to improve urban mobility and to make public transport systems safer and more efficient, so that which will really help in cutting carbon emissions and you know, integrating more green spaces into the city, which doesn't just mean spaces that are green.
Gardens.
You know? yeah, but like eco-friendly buildings and community gardens, you know.
Yeah.
And the
Okay.
enforcement, like integrating it into education, because there's supposedly should
100%.
be, right? Like that should be something that people should learn in school, so that it will kind of, they don't have to take the extra. I mean, it's important to take the extra step, but if you're taught to it in school, then it will be a lot easier for you to really know about sustainable development. So there's actually a law for that, but they're not really strictly enforcing that. So
Can I add one last thing?
Sure.
With everything that Chelsea said, I think what's so important is the government should make sure that they don't neglect the marginalized groups or communities. That's why I think research is so important, so that there's a holistic perspective of all the groups, all the classes, and also the rural and urban areas, so that they're not neglected in these policies. So for example, if one group would benefit from a certain reform, what if another group would kind of take the slack off of that, right? So I think the government should really take that into consideration when they do these reforms.
Right.
Yeah.
Completely agree. It's gonna take an entire shift in the system. Like everything that you guys just laid out, like I see it sort of in like a master plan of like
a master. What do you mean?
master plan, like because like in government, lawmakers they can draw up master plans. So like a set of laws that are implemented in the first year. And then set to be dispersed throughout the course of like 20-30 years. Philippines, the general amount or like length of a master plan is 30 years. But in other countries, they're planning 80 years ahead, 90 years, 100 years ahead. And so that's one of the things that my professors say, you know, we sort of lack in the Philippines. We lack foresight and care for the future. So a complete overhaul of the system is necessary, and it has to begin now. So this is really a call to our government officials to take more action in, you know, battling this crisis, or at least softening the blow for when we're, you know, going to be facing it down the line in the future. Chelsea, I just want to ask, could you explain to the viewers what 0 kilometer food is? And that's not really like a buzzword yet. Like it hasn't really come out on social media, so I feel like not a lot of people will really know about it. Could you share that with us?
Oh yeah, so 0 kilometer food, by, you know, just by its name, is just trying to cut down the amount of distance traveled by food. So, yeah, but it's just 0 kilometers. No, but yeah, because a lot of people don't realize that to get to their plate, like the food has to travel through cars and other transport systems. But yeah, and these transport systems contribute so much to the to carbon emissions, and that's really a big part of raising or increasing temperature, which is like the main thing about climate change.
Right. So there are like a lot of industries that contribute a lot of the percentage to climate change. So like the biggest would be food, clothing, aviation, transport, energy, etc.
Yeah.
But now that we're on the topic of food, I know that you guys have dabbled in veganism or are continuing to be vegan. Are you guys vegan right now?
No, we're not but I would consider myself as mainly plant-based.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
Same though, like completely agree. Like it's really tough to be vegan in the Philippines, but like it starts with like sort of like these small choices and like as we were saying, like all of these things add up, right? So like just my question, like do you guys think that it is possible to go vegan in the Philippines still, despite it being really hard?
Yeah, definitely. But I think it goes like the answer goes much deeper than that, in the sense that so yeah, I mean, veganism used to not be so popular back in the day, and now that it gained popularity and the community is growing, there are more resources you can access. There's more access to vegan food, and but a lot of people are talking about how vegan alternatives seem to be costly, and that it just seems like you're buying expensive food from wealthy options or imported products, and I've heard that they're wealthy options.
It's so true though. It's so accurate.
Yeah, like I mean, people think you have to heavily rely on imitation meats and those imported products, but you can honestly get creative and just learn. Honestly, cooking at home really helps you not only develop your cooking skills, but even lessen your expenses in food.
Yeah.
I saw some of the stuff you cooked, JT, the vegan stuff.
Yeah, I've been experimenting, trying to go vegan here and there, like replacing one meal in a day. Like that's a good start already. Yes, like I see all these vegan YouTubers saying.
Awesome, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I just want to add to what Chelsea said. Like there's a lot to unpack in that question, because a lot of people view veganism as primarily Western, or it's kind of seen as culturally inaccessible in the Philippines. I think that there are certain ways of implementing veganism that isn't the typical Western way that Filipinos can kind of localize into their own context. There's that aspect of taking in Western products, which might go against, for example, what Chelsea mentioned of 0-kilometer food. I think that being able to take on like incremental changes, like what he said, is important and more accessible to the Philippines. And I think that kind of taking into a view of veganism as not just Western or meat alternatives would make it easier for Filipinos to localize the food. Though I think we should not kind of forget about that cultural aspect, because some groups really won't even consider it because it might not be as easy for them, or maybe they're really just so into meat already because it's new culture.
People,
that may be the only way for them to transition is through meat alternatives. So they might not be into just eating like vegetables. But I think what's so important is people also take into the nutritional aspect of it, because there are a lot of myths to be debunked there. And I think in the Philippines, we have a lot of those myths that need to be debunked so people could eat more holistically.
Yeah, true. And true. Yeah. I think, I think that, I also think something important to keep in mind is that we can't neglect those who can't really afford to get creative, because I know I've always talked about, it doesn't have to be all, like we said, it's true. I mean, you can get creative and that helps you transition your diet to veganism. But when like we said, the answer goes deeper than that, because in order to make it possible for everyone, I think we really need systemic change, and we need the government to help us transition or help influence the dietary patterns of Filipinos to a more plant-based lifestyle so that it's more affordable and accessible. Because I know a lot of our economy heavily depends on agriculture and fisheries and livestock and poultry.
Yeah.
A lot of people depend on that for their lively to make a living. So it's in order to make that a complete reality, to completely a possible reality, which I think is possible, but it's really difficult. We need systemic change, right?
Yeah.
And we need the government to listen and help us make that happen.
Yeah. One last thing, can I
Sure, go for it.
I think we should also think, like going back into culture. I think it also makes it more difficult for Filipinos to be vegan if it's like a family thing, because families are very meal memory kind of people in the Philippines.
Yeah,
so it makes it a bit more difficult for people to take that on, because they can't just individually change their meal while their whole family changes eats a different meal.
True, food's very social.
It is. It really is. As you guys said, so much to unpack with this question. But I personally relate to a bunch of those sentiments. First beginning with what we ended with, family wise. As you guys saw on my Instagram stories, I tried to make vegan food and vegan meals, but usually that's just for myself, because my family isn't super into it yet, and that's understandable because you're right, it's cultural. It's Filipinos are generally known to be meat eaters. We eat a lot of rice, but then it's always complemented with some sort of meat like pork or beef or chicken, and then we also have a lot of fish in the country, so fish as well. But when we're talking about produce in the Philippines and us being a very heavily agricultural country, that's where I see the key to possibly institutionalizing it, because I do recognize that the Western notion of veganism and is having alternatives to meat. So it's fake meat, it's vegan sausages, vegan frozen food, and those aren't really even super healthy. They're just meat alternatives. But the beauty of us being a more agricultural country, and I recognize the privilege in saying this, is that we do have the option to get fresh produce all the time from our wet markets. And so if you're at home and you're interested in trying out cooking a vegan dish, look it up online, look for a recipe that you can make at home, something you can get from the market or order online.
Ask
and give
JT
it
for
a shot.
recipes.
Yeah, I usually, my favorite vegan meals are eggplant meals, because I love eggplant. It's I've tried doing eggplant pasta, eggplant lasagna, and everything.
Sounds good.
Really fun. It's really good. Yeah. So if you're bored at home and you have the time and you have the capabilities and you want to try something new, check it out, because 100% recommend. Super good all the time.
True.
But
Awesome.
we're going back. Yeah, really, it takes institutional change, systemic change. We have to be aware of our food choices, because up until 2 years ago, I had no idea about the impact of eating meat would be on the climate. I just thought that, there's nothing that comes out of eating meat, but then there's so much actually that adds up incrementally. It's so crazy when you learn about it.
Yeah, and I think people should really take initiative to learn about it. It seems inconvenient.
Yeah.
Right, but I actually learned from Kirsten. She's the reason why I learned about veganism in the first place.
Yeah.
I used to tease her and be like, my bacon is, you can't have bacon. But yeah.
My brother's the same.
But she really for some reason she inspired me to do my research, and I learned more about the environmental impact. So yeah, Kirsten, wow.
Well, thank you, Kristen, for slowly sort of contributing to this whole process from the beginning. Okay, so we talked about one aspect of food. Food is such a huge contributor to climate change and carbon dioxide emissions. So another topic that a lot of people are sort of realizing now, that sorry, not topic, but rather like industry that really affects climate change would be fashion, so clothing, whatever you wear. And this is really perpetuated by what people are calling to be fast fashion. So, and fast fashion is basically when you have these huge conglomerate clothing industry brands that are constantly changing their clothing cycles and coming out with new clothes all the time. And like they do it through numerous environmental and human rights violations. Like, if you guys have watched The True Cost on Netflix, 100% recommend. It really highlights the effects of climate change and human rights effects that the fast fashion industry can have. So like they talked about sweatshops and modern day slavery. They also talked about pollution through coloring of clothes and so much more. So I just want to know what your thoughts are on fast fashion. I feel like the fashion culture in the Philippines is extremely prevalent because we have so many malls, and malls really perpetuate this sort of fast fashion culture. So I want to know what your thoughts are on this particular topic.
Personally, for me, I think fast fashion is like really hard to escape. I'm not really the best example in this. I still do buy from brands that are fast fashion, though that's one thing I believe that I'll be taking on more this year. And also because we're in quarantine, you don't really buy clothes because you wear the same things all the time.
Every day.
Which I think is right. Which I think is very important in the movement against fast fashion.
Yeah, it's normalizing it.
Right?
Yeah.
But I also think that it's hard to escape because it's cheaper for most people. It's what you see all the time. But then when we realize that it's cheaper, it's because it could have been it was allowed to be cheaper because of its processes, right? I think there needs to be more education on it because we have seen some of this on social media, but then sometimes we might get like a term that Chelsea taught me, greenwashed. Or is that the right way to use that term?
Like
Yeah,
greenwashing.
Yeah. So I think like some companies, they might seem to be taking steps, but then there needs to be more consideration into how they're doing it and how consumers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think I on the upside, on the very small upside, I think that fast fashion kind of democratizes fashion because it makes trends and basically trends are like trendy clothes more accessible at more affordable prices. So and a lot of people want to hop on the trend bandwagon, like the newest, whatever the newest. That's how corporations try to profit off of people. But the way that they produce those clothes, like you said, is very unsustainable and exploits child labor. Like you said, modern day slavery, and it really violates, like you said, again, human rights, and also has detrimental effects to the environment. So even though there may be that small upside, like we have to really be conscious of, become more responsible consumers, because there's just so much to look into that, like into fast fashion in general. I mean, so I think we really need to shift to slow fashion on a deeper, like, again, we need systemic change for that, because some people can't afford, some.
Yeah, when you're talking about slow fashion, I was reminded of, because like personally, I identify like as a minimalist. So I haven't bought clothes since December of like last year's 2019, so Christmas time. So I rarely really go out anymore and buy clothes. I used to buy a new set of clothes like every other week, but then like as we keep saying it, like it just adds up, and then you realize like how much you have, and like it's great to have all these things, but like what I've come to realize is that like you really don't need all of it. And like for me, it was just adding up. It was becoming clutter, and like my room is small, so I don't really have a lot of storage for it. So like every day when I open my closet, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much. I don't know what to wear. It gives me sort of bit of anxiety because like the clothing, as we say, is a social thing. Like we talk about trends because how people relate to clothing and like is deeply personal as well as it is social. And so your choices on clothing really matter to a person regardless of who you are. It shows it can display so much. It can display etiquette, it can display status, it can display, or it can just be a form of expression. So people really have like a connection to clothing that really has to be understood and studied. And so when I think about minimalism, like I would buy from fast fashion brands, but then like all I would buy are basics and then use those basics until they get worn out, and then if they're still okay at the end of their life, then and I find that they're good enough to donate, I'll donate it. So just a tip, guys, if you're decluttering your closet during this time, like being at home in quarantine, um, I suggest investing in a good set of basics that you can use frequently and pair up with other articles of clothing, to really create like an outfit that you can feel comfortable in. And then whatever you don't need anymore but is still good enough to give to somebody else and make somebody else happy if they need it, I encourage you guys to donate that as well. So
Yeah.
I really
yeah.
admire that, JT.
Yeah,
Oh,
same.
thank you.
How do I do this
Great
clap
tip.
reaction?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, I admire that because honestly, I personally was a big shopper. I think the trend that we have to have, not like catching on the trends, the no new. I know I heard of a hashtag no new clothes, and that we should normalize that because I think sometimes people put peer pressure on oh, you're wearing the same thing again or something like that, which honestly shouldn't be the case. Yeah, so I still have a lot of clothes in my closet because I was a big shopper, and it's really like as a kid especially, I was like, I like this, but and I know that's very privileged, and like when you learn more about it, it's like you said, maximizing your use out of it, buying clothes that you really like or need or feel like you'll really get to wear them out, but still take care of them. I mean, like make most out of your wear.
100%. Yeah. Oh, and guys, also look into thrifting. Like this jacket, I thrifted it.
Nice. I was gonna compliment you on it.
Yeah, actually too.
Thanks. But yeah, see, like there's so many cool finds that you can get like in thrift stores, ukay, diba? Parang you can really find all of these used but then still in really good condition clothing that are really coming back into trend as well. So yeah, I encourage you guys to check those out. There's so many alternatives to fast fashion nowadays. That's the beauty of like being in a very highly technologized world, if that's even a word. And so yeah, look it up online. Check out Carousel, Facebook Marketplace, Ateneo Trade if you're from Ateneo. And you can find so many used, pre-loved goods that are still waiting to be used that you can probably still
and loved again.
Put on. Yeah. So like I follow all of these different thinkers in this space, like people who are minimalists, people who are climate activists.
Did he
but I think that
froze.
oh,
Did he freeze?
wait, you guys both froze.
Okay, it's
All right, thank you.
And we're back.
Great.
Now we're back.
We're back. Okay. So my laptop kind of like froze. So I'm gonna be on my phone. I kind of look like I'm vlogging now because I'm just holding my phone.
Yeah.
But we'll finish the last two questions because like we're just about to end anyway. So before we got cut off, the questions that I was going through, we're really gonna be talking about climate activists, so people who are quite known. So I think the most famous climate activist of our generation, she's been given so much global attention. Her name is Greta Thunberg, if you've heard about her, guys. And she is a Swedish girl who started the Fridays for Future movement that Chelsea was talking about earlier. She campaigned outside of the Swedish parliament. She cut classes. in like to show people that there's no point in really going to school if she couldn't really have a normal life to build down the line. And the same goes for people who are being born after 2020. Like their children who are being born in this year moving forward are going to be really facing the brunt of climate change. So I just want to know what you guys think about Greta Thunberg, and if you think that she is an effective climate activist.
Go for it, Ross.
Okay. Personally, I do think that she is effective. I know that a number of people dislike her style of activism because she's straightforward, or they call her too extreme. Some people like Donald Trump, they just label her as an angry kid, and they use that as an excuse to not listen to her. But I think that she was able to spark a really big movement, and that puts pressure on world leaders, and that got a lot of people to listen, and that got a lot of members of the youth to feel like they could do the same thing. And as a young female, as a teenage a female, like she's 17 years old, she was able to do so much. At the same time, while she's living by example, she's also trying to call for governments to change.
Like adding to Chelsea's sentiments, Greta Thunberg, well, I've been thinking a lot about effective activism and effective charities or advocacies, and I think I also agree with Chelsea that I believe she's effective because she has sparked this movement, and what's important is she makes adults uncomfortable, and she kind of makes people realize that we're working for a future generation. She's showing like our prior generations didn't super work for our generations in terms of climate change, to be frank. She's kind of showing that how we can work for future generations and for future civilizations to come. Or I'm not sure if I used the term civilizations correctly, but then I think that the future, they have no say in what's happening right now. So I think her bringing that up, for us to work for people who can't really bargain on what's happening now the way we didn't have that chance, is really important. And she has a large platform. Like the fact that we know of her and how she sparked this whole movement, I think is very effective in terms of getting people to reform.
Yeah, and by starting alone, right? Like you said, she started by herself. She really took the initiative. Yeah, people think she's extreme, but what's extreme is that we're in the middle of a crisis, and no one's taking action on it. No one's doing anything
100%.
about it. And people may think, that style of activism doesn't help because it turns people off when you're too angry. But she actually, she mentioned that because in the way that we frame the climate crisis, we oftentimes hear about it in a doom and gloom mindset, like, oh, you're gonna die, you gotta panic, or like a hope mindset. She thinks that hope, like we've had years of that, of pep talking and positive ways to view climate change or acting in climate change, and it doesn't work. So that's what she said that in one of her TED Talks. And she has the guts to say, how dare you, to like world leaders like in the UN.
That takes guts indeed. Like I honestly look up to her a lot because she has so much courage for such a young person, and like she is the embodiment of the youth speaking out against this crisis, like how I see her. But like there are a lot of, like, she did face a lot of criticism as well, and like here back home in the Philippines, I also saw like a bunch of people saying there's so many Filipino climate activists that need to be given attention as well, but who aren't necessarily like known also. But I just want to know, like, if you guys can like perhaps suggest for us like who we should be listening to who are Filipino activists for climate resilience here in the Philippines.
Oh yeah, but may I add, like, I know that people are also
Sure.
criticizing like Greta for, you know, like nothing's actually been happening. Like that some people are
Yeah.
saying, you know, carbon emissions, I mean, like our policies aren't really changing. But that like I don't think we can just depend on Greta to change that. Like she's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
we need collaborative action, and we need collective and collaborative action, and she's helping that happen. So I think that's what makes her really effective.
Agreed. Super agreed.
Yeah. Like in terms of Filipino, like young Filipino climate activists, I personally don't really know a lot of them by name. There are a lot of them here in the Philippines, but a lot of them are afraid to speak out as much because I don't think it's possible for us to have like our own Greta. But there was one person named Joanna Sustento, and people say that she in the same way as Greta, she held her own sign outside of Shell headquarters, like just by herself, asking for climate justice. You know, like I didn't really like not. I think in the Philippines it's hard for, like we mentioned earlier, people are afraid to speak out, and it really lessens like the ability of young climate activists to become more vocal or more proactive. But there are a big number of them, and a lot of youth organizations like Youth Strike for Climate, Youth for Hope, Youth Advocates for Climate Action. So a lot of people are working, or even within the country's limitations, are trying to work to help fight against climate change.
Kristen, you want to add to that?
Yeah. Well, Chelsea already mentioned the Youth Strike for Climate, which is one movement I think needs more attention because it's focusing on the youth and climate change reform. I don't know that many individuals either. I only did like some research and like to know some names, but they're under those organizations. I do think that in general, organizations that are environmental deserve attention. Though I think and support, but I think that these organizations also have to take in more consideration to becoming more effective in the way they implement their movements. But I believe that all youth organizations, for example, like even the Environmental Society in Ateneo, or those movements you see in social media, I think they deserve attention because it allows people to engage in the discourse.
100%. Actually, that was supposed to be the last question I was going to ask, but I forgot to ask earlier, which was what organizations can people join to help battle climate change? I guess the answers came before the questions, which is perfectly fine. Because this setup is sort of like an FGD sort of style. But that's super true. Like we don't really see a lot of individual climate activists in the Philippines, but we do see them in collectives or organizations. And I think that's where we have a lot of strength because we really embody our culture of bayanihan. To those who aren't familiar, bayanihan is this Filipino act wherein people would come together and help people move houses. So what people would do in the Philippines before was they would build their bahay kubo or their homes on stilts, and then these stilts could be lifted. They're like bamboo stilts. They could be lifted and carried all around the country or wherever they needed to go. And the way that they would move would be through bayanihan or asking their neighbors for help. And so this culture of sort of coming together and working towards something has always been innately within us as a Filipino society. And that's what I'm saying when I say I think this is where our strength comes from, because we do have the power to organize, we do have the power to come together and take collective action, as Chelsea was saying earlier. And this is really the call for us, I think. Now that we discussed so much today. We talked about the climate crisis, the effects of the climate crisis in the Philippines, how we can make our own differences in our personal lives. And so now I think really is the time to work towards building something. So like the master plan that we talked about earlier, something that can be proposed in Congress even, and there's so many avenues for us to explore. And I think that like if I have any parting words for today to our audience, I think it would be that like now that we've sort of begun educating ourselves on this whole issue, I think that we have to begin talking about how we can take more action. And let's start with what we talked about earlier, like the 0 kilometer food, zero waste, solid waste management, switching out vegan meals for meat meals if you can, and simply talking about the climate crisis to your friends, family, social media. So yeah, do you guys want to add any final words to for our conversation today?
I just really admire what you're doing now, JT, and I'm really happy to be a
Thank
part of
you.
it. Yeah, I agree with you. And
So glad to have you guys on here.
yeah, thank you. Like, just talking about climate change. I haven't, it's not easy to really find people who are willing to talk about it because the truth is inconvenient, truth.
Yes.
And
Al
and
Gore.
it's also scary, right? Yeah, and it's also scary.
is.
So yeah, but it's really important to discuss this, especially with the members of the youth.
Mhm.
And I think that's really important.
100%.
I subscribed to your channel already, and I will
Oh, thank you.
Have not seen it.
Yeah, guys, like and subscribe and hit that bell
like and
button.
subscribe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. I just want to add one thing.
Sure.
Because you mentioned earlier about organizations, right, to donate to. I think like since we can't really donate to all organizations, we have to think about the most effective organizations to donate to in terms of like the goals we're trying to reach. So, for
Mhm.
example, when we look at carbon emissions, and we can support organizations that focus on these. So, like two that I know of are the Coalition for Rainforest Nations and the Clean Air Task Force. So these aren't based in the Philippines, but they do global work. And yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I'll try to link them in the description down below. So Kristen, you are managing Effective Altruism Blue. Could you talk about that a little bit before we go? Because I think it's a really interesting concept to have people know about. So take it away.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So I recently I recently gone to Effective Altruism Blue. I heard about it last year when they recruited people in Ateneo, but then I became more active last May. And now I'm managing EA Blue, and
President, right?
Yeah.
I admire what EA does. So what effective altruism is, and EA Blue is the Atenean chapter. It's a philosophy and a movement to do the most good with the resources you have, using evidence to do so. So it aims to find the most effective interventions, organizations, and charities to support, as well as the specific cause areas that are attractable, neglected, and I forgot the last one.
Solvable.
Yeah. But then so essentially, it's trying to be as effective as possible to do the most good, backed up by science, which is something I super
That's
agree
awesome.
with. Yeah, because because if you really want to make change, it's really great to find the best way to do so.
Yeah. Chelsea, could you also go over the Better Normal campaign quickly before we end? I think this is also really important for Greenpeace.
Okay, so I joined I actually just saw that Greenpeace had this campaign and advocacy course, which I was interested in. And their Better Normal campaign really strives to, like what I mentioned earlier, all those things like urban mobility, green spaces, 0 kilometer food, zero waste, also just involving the youth in planning. Greenpeace is very active in trying to achieve that agenda. So the Better Normal is really just trying to, it's realizing, especially now in the midst of a pandemic, that what we had, like I know it's been talked about, but our normal was a crisis, and it shouldn't have been. We have to denormalize what used to be normal. And I think that the pandemic really exacerbated or amplified the negative effects or the negative things that are happening to the environment. So the Better Normal is a campaign that aims to really shift the way that we are the different practices that we have or that we used to have before the pandemic, so that after the pandemic, and even in the middle of the pandemic, because who knows how long it's going to last,
Yeah, definitely.
well, it will really strive for a better normal. So a more sustainable, it's really striving for sustainable development, a more economically prosperous, socially inclusive, and well-governed society. And I think it's possible. We just really have to fight for it and get more people to join in the campaign. Hashtag better normal.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you guys so much for joining this conversation and for really like taking the time to discuss this with me. I super appreciate both of you.
Happy to.
Yeah.
And for everybody who's watching, you know, this is a call to action. This is the time that we have to step out in courage and start making a difference, because we don't know how much time we have left to change how the future is set to be at this point in time. So keep joining our conversations. Please do like and subscribe, because it helps the YouTube algorithm and it helps spread our message forward. So that was it for the talk on climate change. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and that hopefully you can share this with your friends who may not be super knowledgeable about climate change. This is a good way to start. And then you can do further research, and then we can even partner up together. All right, thank you guys so much again for joining me. We'll see you guys in the next one. Maybe we can have another conversation, like a part 2, something a little bit more in depth down the line.
Yeah.
But I really thank you guys for participating, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.
Thanks, JT.
Thank you, JT.
Bye. Thank you guys. Thank you so much.